If you have read my book, The Death by Bunjie Crossbow Method, Strategies for Crossbow Hunting Success, if you've read that book, you've learned one thing for sure, and that, in my opinion, in Bunjie's opinion, lighted nocks are mandatory. In the modern era here, there's really just no excuse to not be using lighted nocks. I use them all the time for my hunting. Absolutely going to use them for the hunting, but I use them all the time in practice too. A lighted nock like the one on this main hunter arrow that I used to kill that bear really helps you see where your arrow is going when you pull the trigger. You can watch it through the scope. You can watch it impact your target animal. The question though, and this is a great question, it really is, it's an important question. It's one of those things we got to be thinking about, but can deer or other animals see this nock coming their way? Will it make a difference in your hunting? Will they react to it a little bit more, a little bit differently than they would if it was just an arrow coming at them? We all know that deer can react to the sound of your crossbow. They can react to the sound of the string hitting the bumpers or thrusting the arrow through the air, the sound of the trigger mechanism releasing the string, the sound of the bow going off, right? All that excess energy that our crossbows leave behind after the arrow leaves the crossbow, all that excess energy gets turned into sound, right? A lot of it does. And that sound can certainly affect deer movement. I did a great video on that, I think. I interviewed an engineer, Garen Cummings, and we put together a whole bunch of really neat information in a video, and you should check that video out if you haven't already. The difference, though, between the sound of you pulling the trigger and the crossbow firing that arrow downrange and the light from the lighted nock is that light travels a lot faster than sound. So think about that. If deer can see this the minute you pull the trigger, they've got a warning long before the sound, not long before, but milliseconds before the sound reaches them at 30 yards away, let's say. The light is there almost instantaneously. It travels at the speed of light. So if they can see this nock, that's something we need to think about, right? My success in the woods with Bunjie and Bunjie III, and Genevieve's success with Bunjie Jr., all across the board with lighted nocks, if I thought that I was having a problem because of lighted nocks, I would have considered it by now. It would have been something that I thought, wait a minute, we got to do something about that, right? I've shot deer with Bunjie III, shooting them close to 400 feet per second with those arrows that I've got currently. The deer that I shot last year in Maryland at 20 yards didn't react one bit with no lighted nock. Went right through that deer. At 30 yards last year during Pennsylvania's second crossbow season, the rifle season here in Pennsylvania, I shot a doe at 30 yards with a lighted nock. That doe did not react either in any significant way before that arrow reached the deer. Now, maybe it would make a difference if those deer were looking at me, if those deer were alert, but that would also affect my shot selection and whether I shot the deer, right? So you kind of take that into account. You learn to take that into account as we grow as crossbow hunters, I think. The interesting thing, though, the side view of me shooting that doe at 30 yards, you can see it very clearly. You can see that lighted nock beautifully. It was just as though I saw it when I pulled the trigger. So I decided, let's go out in the 60-yard backyard. I went out in the 60-yard backyard. I set up a target, and I set up the camera, the phone, set that up on a tripod, sort of set up the way a deer would be. The target was going to receive the arrow. That represents the body of the deer. And the tripod where I was going to mount the phone, that would represent where the deer's head would be if the deer were looking at me, where the deer's eyes would be. Set the camera up to record at 120 frames per second, so it's recording some extra footage of that arrow as it's coming through. A lot more frames means a lot more chances to spot that arrow coming through the air. We've got more of an advantage here than the deer would even have. We're just after sunset here, still in legal shooting light. It's going to get darker, right? It certainly is. There's a darker period of time coming, but I took this shot, about a 20-yard shot, shooting a little bit downhill, somewhere between where you would shoot on the level from a blind and up in the air in a tree stand, kind of in the middle of the two, right? Shooting a little bit downhill in the 60-yard backyard. And that shot, I can tell you when you slow it down, you don't see the lighted nock. What you see going through the air, actually, even at the angle from the deer's perspective, you see the two orange veins in some of those frames, but you don't really see anything that appears to be a light or anything out of the ordinary. But I don't think it is, because it doesn't. The bottom line is it's not bright enough to really affect any kind of animal's movement or reaction. Not from the receiving end of the arrow. If you do this right, the arrow is sort of blocking the animal's view of the nock, right? The nock's on the back end of it. The arrow's kind of covering it up if you do it right. The light is back here. It's showing to me. It does show from the side if it's sticking in the grass or something like that, especially when it gets real dark. You can see this from a distance. If it's real dark out, the amount of light in the air makes a big difference too. But I can tell you these things are bright enough that I can see them from 60 yards in the daytime. In bright daylight, I can see them. Looks good to me. In theory, if a deer could see it, they can see it all day long. Don't not use a lighted nock just because you're afraid that a deer might see it. That is, in my opinion, a bad reason to not use a lighted nock. I really think you should consider using lighted nocks and, go experiment with different ones. Make sure you're using the right nock for your crossbow. That's important. But lighted nocks can be pretty cool. They can really improve your game. They can really up your game. They're expensive. I get that. I totally do. But most of them, at least the ones that I use, are reusable. Like I can reuse those igniter nocks from New Fletch Archery. I just bought new little bobber lights to put in them. When the batteries go dead, you buy new ones, and they're not that expensive. For the Luminox, when the batteries go dead, I just replaced the batteries. Did a video about that during Crossbow Appreciation Month last month. So check those videos out. I hope you got something out of this video. Check out some other Death by Bunjie fun. And until next time, all hail Bunjie.